Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
This is Lindsay Smith-Rogers. Today, we talk climate change, notably the news out of December's global COP28 meeting. Susan Joy Hassol, a well-known climate change communicator, tells Stephanie Desmon that while some have called the agreement and its discussions of fossil fuels a victory in and of itself, little progress can be made until fossil fuels are fully phased out. Let's listen.
Susan Joy Hassol, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be with you.
I brought you here today because I really want to talk to you about the aftermath of COP28. So I guess we can start with, please explain to my listeners who may not remember what COP28 is.
Yeah, so a COP, Conference of the Parties, to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is the international agreement that people have probably heard of involving all the world's countries. They may have heard of the Paris Agreement because there was a big agreement made at the Paris COP, Conference of the Parties. So this is the 28th one of those.
So I've seen some headlines coming out, the most recent one, which was in December in Doha. And there's some language I understand that says we will transition away from fossil fuels. Some people are saying that's a big victory. Some people are saying it's not what it cracked up to be. Could you please tell me what the story is there?
Yeah, so I think that it was a disappointing outcome. I think it was both a day late and more than $1 short. There's systematic problems, like having petrostates like the United Arab Emirates host and preside over a conference and have the fossil fuel industry play such a major role. I mean, they have a clear conflict of interest. It's a proverbial fox guarding the henhouse. And there are other issues. But there was some progress made, but it wasn't nearly enough. Right. So there was some progress made on what they call loss and damage. This is how the developed countries are going to help the less developed countries deal with all the problems that climate change is bringing, especially because these developing countries had so little to do with making the problem happen. And they're the ones who are suffering the most. But the language, the thing that you're talking about that everyone's, there was a lot of self-congratulation on the part of the host of the conference. And I think that is frankly nauseating for me to see all that kind of celebratory self-promotion of historic achievement. And it's just pure pretense of the oil and gas executives and companies that they are trustworthy partners in the energy transition. I think what we have to do is compare their words to their actual actions, their investments, and their plans before we give them too much credit. In the agreement, it calls on the parties to contribute to global efforts, including transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, and accelerating technologies like carbon capture and storage. It also recognizes transitional fuels can play a role in the transition. Now, all of those weasel words and wiggle words and weak language, it's really pretty weak tea. Because what we need is to phase out fossil fuels. And they would not agree to that. There's no way. Saudi Arabia and some other countries just say no. They don't want to. So my colleague Mike Mann likes to say, this is like you go to your doctor and he tells you have diabetes and you say, don't worry, I'm going to transition away from donuts in an orderly manner. I will get to net zero donuts by 2050. It's not enough. There's no targets. There's no timetables. It's not legally binding. And so I feel like it's kind of a lot of greenwashing. In the meantime, these countries are saying, yeah, we're going to transition away from fossil fuels. But at the same time, what are they doing? Right. So ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, which the president of COP28 leads, they are currently investing at least $150 billion over the next 5 years to increase oil and gas drilling. To expand their drilling. So if the new agreement means anything, those plans should immediately be scrapped, but they're not. Similarly, utilities all over the U.S. are planning to build new, what they call natural gas, I call it methane gas, power plants. If this agreement means anything, those plans are going to be scrapped, but I don't think we're going to see that. For example, new liquefied natural gas, LNG, terminals are being planned for the United States, Louisiana, and elsewhere. If this agreement means anything, those plans should be scrapped. So instead of listening to the words, we should watch their actions.
I know that the fossil fuels are obviously involved in climate change. Can we do other things besides reduce fossil fuels, or is it really sort of nothing's going to happen unless we get a commitment to really abandon them?
So both things are true. Fossil fuels are 75 to 80% of the problem in the problem of climate change. There are other issues. There's agriculture. There's what we eat, how we do animal agriculture, right? Beef, lamb, dairy products, some of the worst offenders in terms of methane production, which is a very potent heat-trapping gas. So there are other things, but phasing out fossil fuels is number one. It is the big thing. It's the gorilla in the room. It's 75 to 80% of the problem. So we must phase out fossil fuels. The sooner, the better. Now, we're not going to turn them all off immediately. We have, an existing society that's built on fossil fuels right now. So that's why I say phase out as opposed to shut them all off tomorrow, right? It's going to take us a few decades to completely phase them out. But if that's your goal, what you need to do right away is say no new fossil fuel infrastructure. Right? If we're phasing them out, it makes no sense to do new drilling, new exploration, new pipelines, new transport, facilities, all of that, because we have all the existing stuff we're going to have to transition from slowly. So no new fossil fuels. That's sort of the bottom line of what we have to agree to. So we also have to change some things about agriculture. We have to stop cutting down the forests. We have to preserve and protect our forests, our coastal wetlands, and other natural areas, peatlands and so forth. So those are the big things we have to do. And we have to deploy enough clean energy to replace all the fossil fuels we're phasing out. And so we're doing pretty well on deploying clean energy. We need to do more faster, but we're doing pretty well. What we're not doing so well at is phasing out the fossil fuels. Coal plants are being phased out, especially in the US and in some other places, but they're still building new gas plants, and that's got to stop. And they're still doing new exploration for oil and gas, and that's got to stop.
Do you feel like there was some progress, or do you come away feeling like this was all for naught?
There was some progress, but it wasn't nearly enough. And part of the problem, I think, is frankly having a petrostate be the host and presiding over the session and having so many fossil fuel lobbyists be part of this. And I think the other thing that's a little distressing to me is that the Conference of the Parties has become like a giant global trade show. 70,000 people or something came there from all over the world. That's not necessary. What we need to do is focus back on the core purpose of this. This is for the world's countries to get together and work on how we are going to bring down the emissions of this heat-trapping pollution that's causing this problem. And 28 times we've gotten together as a world, and it took us to the 28th time to even mention the words fossil fuels in the agreement. The first 27 agreements did not mention the words fossil fuels. So that's crazy, right? And so instead of patting ourselves on the back that we finally mentioned the gorilla in the room, we finally mentioned fossil fuels, why did it take so long? And why can't we get more clear, more binding language that then people will live up to? So I'm not going to declare victory until I see carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere level off and start to come down.
Do you feel like we're running out of time here?
We are in a race. We are in a race to see whether we can garner the political will, the social will to make the changes we need to make before too many of the climate tipping points kick in, right? So we need to reach a social tipping point before we reach too many of the climate tipping points, right? We've already reached a few climate tipping points. We don't want to reach too many more. There's never going to be a point at which I say it's too late. There's no point in doing anything, because every degree matters, right? The more of this heat trapping pollution, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, the more of those emissions, the hotter it's going to get, and the worse the impacts are going to be. So it's not like a cliff we fall off. It's more like a minefield. The further we go out onto that minefield, the more chance we're going to get blown up. So the higher the temperature goes, the worse the impacts are going to get, and the more irreversible things are going to become, and the more thresholds, tipping points in the climate system we're going to cross. That makes it worse and worse. It becomes less you can do about it when those feedbacks start kicking in. So it's too late to avoid dangerous climate change because it's already dangerous. It's already here. We all lived through the last summer, and so we know what that's about. But it's not too late to avoid the worst. It's not too late to avoid a global catastrophe. If we can limit the warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, as close as possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's what the world agreed to in Paris, then we can avoid global catastrophe. We're not going to avoid some impacts. We're already seeing impacts, and they're only going to get worse the more it goes up. But the good news is that we know what we have to do. We know that phasing out fossil fuels, deploying clean energy, and protecting our natural lands will get us where we need to go if we do it quickly. Really take aggressive action, which is what we need to do at this point. And the changes we need to make are good for us for lots of other reasons. Right? It's not a sacrifice to give up fossil fuels. And not only are we going to get a safer climate, we're going to get cleaner air, cleaner water, healthier, more walkable communities. We're going to send fewer kids to the hospital with asthma. It's just going to be a better, healthier, more equitable world. And it's cheaper. Solar, wind, and storage are now the cheapest forms of new energy. It's actually cheaper to create a clean energy future than to create a dirty one. So there's no reason not to do it.
How can COP improve? Does this body have a future? And what kind of improvements can we see there, or will we see there?
So I don't think we can afford to walk away from it because it's the only global multilateral process that we have. But I think some reforms are due. I don't think petrostates should be holding these things. And they've already made Azerbaijan the head for the next one, which is also a country that's dependent on oil and gas. So I think that's a mistake. I also think the fact that they require unanimity among the parties to pass anything is a problem because there's always going to be a skunk at the picnic. And Saudi Arabia is always going to say no to phasing out fossil fuels. So we should try to alter those rules if we can possibly do such a thing to say 80%. If 75 or 80% of the parties agree to something, that's what the agreement is. But the agreements also need more teeth. Right now, they're not binding, and they need to be legally binding. But I think in the end, what's really important is not the words of the agreement to the COP. It's the actions. What's going to determine the future are the actions that countries, states, cities, individuals take. The policies that are in place, the actions that we take, that's what's going to determine the future. It's not going to be the words. We have to be looking at the actions. That's what's going to matter. There are these big gaps right now. We have an ambition gap, right? We haven't pledged to do as much as we need to do, right? We need to cut the global emissions of heat trapping pollution in half in this decade. What we're on track to do is to reduce them by 10%. That's a big gap. We also have an implementation gap. We don't have the policies in place to implement even the pledges we've made that aren't strong enough. So we have an implementation gap. We need better policies in place to implement the goals. And then we have a production gap. The world is on track to produce twice the fossil fuels in 2030 as would be compatible with the goals we agreed to in Paris. Twice the fossil fuels, right? This is crazy. So we need to mind the gap. All three of those gaps I just mentioned, they need to be closed, or we're not going to get where we need to go.
Susan Joy Hassol, thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure to talk with you. Good luck to all of us in the new year.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, Stephanie Desmon, and Grace Ceciri. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinale, Spencer Greer, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Cesiri and Eliza Rosen. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.